Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. In this presentation, our group will be presenting two literary theories in the field of literary criticism. Let's dive in. Formalism and New Criticism revolutionized literary analysis in the early 20th century. Prior to these two literary theories, to understand a text, critics often looked to its historical background and the history of the language used in the text. But with these two approaches, formalism and new criticism, they shifted the focus of literary study from the author's background, history, or social context to the text itself. So instead of asking what the author meant or how the readers feel, these theories emphasize how a work is written. Let's take a look at their definition. Formalism is a literary theory that analyzes text through its form, structure, language, and style over its content, historical context, or author's background. Meaning, formalism focuses on the form over the content. So it's not concerned about what happens in the story. Rather, it is concerned with how it is told. So instead of asking, what is this poem about? A formalist will ask, how do the rhyme and images make the poem powerful? So if you notice, instead of examining the meaning of the text directly, we use the language and structure to analyze the text. Formalism is also not concerned with the historical context and the author, so we don't need to know what was happening in history when the text was written. We also don't need to analyze the writer's life, emotions, or intentions. Instead, in formalism, we analyze the structure, meaning how the parts of the text or the ideas are arranged. We also analyze the language, including the word choice, the tone, and the literary devices used. So you might ask, do the words used by the author sound harsh or soft? Are the words simple or fancy? Do they create vivid imagery or emotional tone? Is there a rhythm or a sentence pattern? That's the essence of formalism. We focus on the text itself, but not the content. On the other hand, new criticism emphasizes the importance of closely reading and analyzing the text itself rather than external concepts. It also examines the content of literature. So new criticism was developed after formalism. It emphasizes close reading, the careful, detailed study of a text's words, imagery, and structure to reveal its unity or oneness of idea and its deeper meaning. Still, it's similar to formalism that it analyzes the words, the structures, the literary devices, and we also disregard the historical context and the word's background. What's different in new criticism, though, is that it also examines the content of literature. By content, I mean the themes, ideas, and messages expressed in the work. So while formalism focuses almost entirely on the mechanics and structure of the text, new criticism combines that analysis with an understanding of the meaning or theme embedded in the text itself. For you to understand better, let's delve into the key principles of these two literary theories.
Now let's discuss the key features of formalism. The first key features is literary devices. Formalists pay close attention to literary devices, things like imagery, symbolism, and metaphor, because they build the meaning of the text. Say for example, in Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken, the two roads symbolizes life choices. A formalist doesn't need to ask what Frost was feeling. Instead, they look at how the symbol of the road and the reflective tone work together to show every choice shapes our life. In other words, the technique itself creates the meaning. The second key feature of formalism is style. Style is how the author uses language, the tone, rhythm, and choice of words. Formalists study this because they reveal the character of the text. So say for example, in Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, the repetition, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am, shows the narrator's unstable mind. The choppy rhythm and repeated words make us feel his anxiety. Formalists see this as a deliberate style choice, not just a random detail. And that is how style works in formalism. They reveal the character of the text. Now, let's delve into the third key feature of formalism, the narrative structure or narrative technique. Formalists also look at the structure, how the story is organized, how events are arranged, and how conflicts are built and resolved. They believe a text has a certain unity where every part connects to the whole. Now, to further understand this, let's have an example. Let's say, for example, in Shakespeare Macbeth, the structure from prophecy to murder to downfall reflects how ambition destroys itself. Even without knowing anything about Shakespeare's life, we can understand the message through how the story unfolds. And because of that, this key features is really important because they show how the story is organized, how events are arranged, and how conflicts are built and resolved. Now, let's move on. And how do we apply formalism when reading a literary work? So to apply formalism, we need to consider these three. First is focus on the text. We should focus on the text, not on the author or your feelings. Second is to look for patterns, symbols, and structure. Third is ask how do all these elements work together to build meaning? Because formalism reminds us a literary text is art and every part of it has a reason. Now that we're done to the key features and how to apply formalism, let's move on to the concept of new criticism. New criticism, it's like the younger sibling of formalism. It grew from the same roots but developed a sharper focus on one thing: close reading. New critics believe that the only way to truly understand a text is to read it carefully, word by word, line by line, and analyze how every element works together. Now, let's move on into the key concepts of new criticism. The first concept of new criticism, intentional fallacy. This concept tells us that we should not depend on the author's intention to find meaning. Once the work is written, it no longer belongs to the author. It belongs to the text itself. So say for example, in Romeo and Juliet, instead of asking, what moral lesson did Shakespeare want to teach? We focus on how light and dark imagery, like Romeo calling Juliet the sun, show how love and tragedy are linked. The meaning isn't in Shakespeare's mind, it's in the language he used. Because intentional fallacy is like, it tells us that we should not depend on the author's intention to find meaning. Because once the work is written, it no longer belongs to the author. It belongs to the text itself. The second concept of new criticism is affective fallacy. This means that we shouldn't let our emotions control our interpretation. It's fine to feel something, but meaning must come from the text, not from how we feel about it. Say for example, in The Great Gatsby, readers might say, it's a sad story about love and dreams. But a new critic would ask, why does it feel sad? By analyzing the symbols, like the green light representing hope, the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eichelberg symbolizing judgment, we realize the sadness comes from the emptiness of material dreams, not just heartbreak. The third concept is the text itself. This is the heart of New Criticism. The text itself contains everything we need to interpret it. We use close reading to uncover its hidden meanings. Let's take Shakespeare's Sonnet 130. It starts with, "My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red." At first, it sounds like Shakespeare is insulting his lover. But if we read it closely, we realize he's actually criticizing the fake perfection often seen in love poems. By describing his mistress honestly, "If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head," he shows that true love sees beyond appearance. This deeper message is not from Shakespeare's life story or our emotions. It's revealed by the words and structure of the poem itself. Now, how do we apply new criticism? So to apply new criticism, we have to consider these three. First is read closely and analyze every word and image. Second is avoid focusing on the author's life or your emotional reaction. The third is support your interpretation using evidence from the text. New criticism helps us see that the real treasure of literature is within the text itself. To wrap it all up, formalism and new criticism both teaches us one powerful lesson, that literature has a life of its own. The beauty of a poem, a novel, or a play isn't found in who wrote it or how we feel about it. It's found in the careful arrangement of words, symbols, and structure that create meaning. When we learn to look closely and listen to what the text itself is saying, we don't just read literature, we experience it as art.
Once again, good morning everyone. So now I'll be discussing the development of literary theory, specifically how it evolved from formalism to new criticism. These two movements completely change how we analyze literature. Instead of focusing on the author's life or historical background, they taught us on focus on the text itself, its structure, language, and techniques. We'll see how these theories began, how they developed, and how one led to the other. And now let's proceed to the origins of Russian formalism. Now, Russian formalism emerged in the early 20th century around the 1910s to 1930s in Russia. It was developed by two major literary groups, which is the Opoyas, or the Society for the Study of Poetic Language, and the Moscow Linguistic Circle. These two groups wanted to make literary studies more scientific, focusing on form, structure, and literary techniques rather than the author's life or social context. So here are some key figures and their ideas, which is Vector Sklovsky introduced the familiarization or making ordinary things seem new. And we have Roman Jakobson, which studied literary language and its poetic functions. We have Boris Eichenbaum, analyzed narrative techniques and how stories are told. And Yuri Tinyanov explained how literary forms evolve over time. So their shared goal was to understand how literature works as art, not as history or biography. And now let's proceed to how formalism developed and spread its influence. Now let's proceed to the development of formalism. As a formalism developed, it introduced the important concept of literariness, which means what makes a text distinctly literary. It also emphasized the foregrounding, where literary devices make readers pay attention to the language itself. So, formalists believe that a literary work is autonomous, meaning it stands on its own and doesn't need to rely on the author's background or historical context. However, due to the political pressures in Russia, many formalists left the country, which helped spread their ideas internationally. Eventually, these ideas reached the Western world and became the foundation for new criticism. So that is how the development of formalism.